Anyway, to decipher that and a lot of other things happened last night during the campaign. So pleased to welcome back to the program John Best, a publisher of the Bay Observer. John, always a pleasure. Were you surprised last night by the turnout and by the result?
No, I certainly wasn't surprised at the result. I mean, the polls have been telling us that right from the get-go. If there was a slight surprise, I suppose it is that Ford ended up with over 40% of the vote when most of the polls were talking 37, 38, 39. So slight variation there. But at the local results, I think were pretty much to be expected. We knew that Hamilton East Stony Creek was going to be in play. And just overall, I would say probably the Conservatives picked up 3 or 4 more seats than had been predicted provincially. But it was pretty much let's face it, I mean, the polls were pretty much telling the story from 2 weeks before the writ was dropped. So not a big surprise. I guess the one area that would be a surprise, though, is I thought the Liberals would do a little better. I thought they would return to official party status, and the fact that they were only able to squeak out 1 more seat than they had, that's a crushing defeat for that party, and they really have to get back to the drawing board and figure out who they are.
What do you read into that? It's one thing to, I guess, rationalize this, say, okay, they got tired of Kathleen Wynne, let's boot her out, which they did, of course, and Doug Ford won that election a few years ago. But there's still something going on there with the Liberals, and have they lost touch with the electorate? I mean, you know, this was a party that was in power for a number of years and seemed to be resonating. I don't know if Kathleen Wynne is going to, shoulder all the blame for that, for some of her policies. Some of the Liberal insiders I've talked to said she moved the party way too far to the left for the comfort of a lot of Liberals who, I think, all of a sudden, especially in this election, John, started to kind of feel comfortable with Doug Ford. You know, this was a guy that, when he first took office and when he, won the election, not this one, but the one before, there were the stories, he was Mike Harris reinvented and there were all sorts of things about that. Well, he's not the bogeyman anymore. He gets along fine with Justin Trudeau, apparently, and he and Chrystia Freeland have a great relationship. So I think disenchanted Liberals kind of felt comfortable, like, yeah, we can park our vote here. And I think that's what happened yesterday.
I talked to a party worker today and about the race in Hamilton East Stony Creek, and the comment was the people that used to vote for Tony Valeri voted for Neil Lumsden. There's a message here for not only the provincial Liberals, who are really in terrible shape, frankly, but I think there's a message here for the federal Liberals as well, that when you move the party to the extremes, especially to the left, people are going to vote NDP. They'll vote for the real thing. They're not going to vote for a party that's trying to emulate being like the NDP. So I think there's a message here. All of these so-called issues, the Highway 413, for instance, every riding that road, if it ever gets built, is running through, went totally blue, and that included 2 pickups from the other parties. So there's something going on here in terms of ideology. Maybe we've reached the high watermark when it comes to identity politics and ideology. Maybe people, having come through 2 years of the pandemic, they just want sensible, what we used to call good government. That may be a big piece of this. But certainly for the PCs, they picked up seats in Windsor. They took 2 seats from the NDP. They picked up a couple of seats in Northern Ontario that I think are directly linked to, in one case, getting a train going into Northern Ontario. In the other case, I think it's this Ring of Fire project that Ford was talking about. Bread and butter issues seem to be a big piece of what happened last night.
There's another element that I wanted to run by you here, John. I'm getting the sense, just from what I've heard on this show over the last number of years, and I'm talking federally and provincially, and probably we could even throw in some municipal aspects of this. I think voters are tired of extremist politics. I think they're tired of the sniping. They're tired of the people that are polarizing and after a point, you just say enough is enough. And as Don Martin wrote in the National Post today, and I used the quote from in my commentary earlier this morning, they looked at Doug Ford and they said, okay, here's the guy. He ran a campaign that was not too progressive and not too conservative, if you understand the contradiction there. And they felt comfortable with that. And not unlike what Bill Davis and John Robarts did. I'm not suggesting Doug Ford's going to be in power for 42 years like those guys were, but it was a comfort zone that I think he established. And I don't know if it was Doug Ford's idea or the party hierarchy that said this is the way we're going to run the campaign, but I think it's what voters were looking for right now. Like, enough of the hype, enough of the BS. We think, you weren't great in this past term. You didn't blow us away. You made a lot of mistakes. But, we're tired of the polarization. Let's build some roads. Let's get some jobs. And to that point, I think one of the other things that still has to be talked about here is the way that organized labor and unionized labor and high-skilled labor have gravitated to the Conservative Party. That's never happened before.
We saw it here in Hamilton. The NDP is going through a little bit of a crisis of existential crisis. It's not as bad as the provincial Liberals, but we're now seeing a split between labor and white-collar labor in terms of supporting the NDP. So the people that build things and do things are now moving towards the Conservatives, because the Conservatives are launching all these construction and all these projects that appeal to either manufacturing workers or construction workers. And really the NDP is left with the teachers, all the public sector unions. And so it's kind of ironic in a sense with Andrea Horwath that she booted what you'd call an old-time labor person in Paul Miller, but in a sense she comes from that background as well. And what's left of her caucus now are more these downtown Toronto, very left people. And to some degree, the party is moving away from the old line labor type people, which sort of includes her. So it was interesting to see her comments last night. You sense that maybe some of that was resonating with her as well.
Well, look at a couple of examples, and you talked about here in Southern Ontario, and we saw this on some of the clips that have been running through the campaign. And one of the most influential groups there is LIUNA, Labor's International Union. Joe Mancinelli, of course, who's the head of that union. They have traditionally been Liberal supporters, constantly, federally and provincially. Kathleen Wynne pissed them off in a big way, and he's moved over to Doug Ford and the Conservatives. And that's a huge amount of support, because that's not just a local Hamilton entity. That's Canadian. That's North American. And they have a lot of muscle. And I know that, in some circles they were saying, well, these two highway projects are wrong because of this, but they're jobs. A lot of people in that union and other unions are going to be working for a long time on those highway projects. And the same thing with the auto workers. I mean, traditionally, as you say, that's been an NDP support. Going back to Buzz Hargrove and to see Jerry Dias, well, he's not there anymore, but the union is still there, because they're saying, hey, look at what he's bringing in here. Look at the investment. When Doug Ford first started in his first 6 months, we were talking plant closures in Oshawa, and the auto industry was in deep peril. Now it's been rejuvenated, and they figured, hey, okay, he's got our back. You get some stuff like that. So some of it was serendipity, but I'm sure a lot of it was strategic to make sure that this is what happened. And they have turned the dynamic around here, as you say, about who's going to support whom these days. And I don't know if the other two parties didn't notice it and didn't realize the impact it was going to have, but I think it was a huge factor.
Not only with the unions, but that resonates more broadly with the public. They see that. They see this discussion about opening up the ring of fire, whatever that ends up being, but talking about, even if you're not in those unions, you're a citizen just paying attention. You see a government that's on a building, a job creation trajectory, and then you hear rhetoric from the others. It's really just, that's one of the disadvantages of being an opposition party. You can make promises where Ford ran on his budget, and he didn't need a platform. His platform was the budget, and it had all kinds of job-creating measures in it. So really, when you look at the numbers from last night, it's probably not a surprise that he's increased his seat count. The first time around, it was Kathleen Wynne that was on the ballot, and that was the ballot question. But this time, he was running on his record, and he increased his seat count.
I want to phrase this properly. I feel badly to a certain extent for Stephen Del Duca, who's only been on the job for 2 years, and historically, our friend Steve Paikin told me this some months ago that Del Duca wanted this job even before Kathleen Wynne left. I think it was always part of his long-term plan. And there's nothing the matter with ambition, but he was the wrong guy at the wrong time for this party. Liberals and NDP tend to want somebody that they can really gravitate to, that somebody can lead them, who's inspiring. And I just don't think he strikes that chord, not just with voters, but with liberals.
He made the best speech of the campaign with his concession speech last night. There was energy. There was a little bit of fire there. And I'm with you. As we get into the last day or two of these campaigns, maybe it's because I once ran and was not successful, but I always have a little bit of a soft spot for the people that you're pretty sure are not going to win. I looked around Hamilton here at some of the candidates that didn't win, and I'm talking about some of the new candidates who were recruited mainly to run for the Liberals, but some of the other parties. And you look at their credentials, and you say, these are people that really could do a good job if they could ever get elected. So Del Duca, let's face it, what a rough slog. The one thing he did do was he erased the party's debt, and I think that's a miracle, really, for a party that got just absolutely crushed. So he's improved their finances. I was prepared to come on this show today and say, well, he got him back to party status, but he didn't. So it's when you're down, you're down. Politics is rough, and this is reminiscent of some of those liberal leaders we had before Trudeau got elected. It's just really, there's just no good news about it at all.
Well, I was thinking that very same thing last night, actually, John. I know we're almost out of time. Paul Martin got booted out. It had a lot more to do with John Chrétien and the sponsorship scandal than it did with Paul Martin, although he was a great finance minister, not such a good prime minister. But then they went through Stéphane Dion and Ignatieff, and they figured, you guys don't get it. You need somebody who's going to spark something going on here. And on the other side of the coin, I think the Conservatives, as Bill Davis said one time, Bland is good. Bland works in Ontario, and I think that's what they tried to do to Doug Ford: pull him back, get him away from the microphones, and just be bland. And that's steady as she goes, I guess, seems to be the theme right now. It's going to be interesting to see. There's a lot more to talk about here. Where Del Duca is going to go, Andrew Horwath's future, but we got a lot of time for that in the days ahead. As always, John, thanks so much. The good news is we didn't have to stay up real late to find out what was going on last night, but there's a lot more to come on this. And you have a great weekend, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Bill. Nice talking.
And John Best, the publisher of the Bay Observer.